Good evening to those joining us in India, and good morning to those joining us from the United States. My name is Yoon Nam, and as a public diplomacy officer at the U.S. Consulate General in Mumbai, it is my honor to MC today's event, Accelerating Women in STEM in India. Today's program is being organized under the auspices of the U.S.-India Alliance for Women's Economic Empowerment, a public-private partnership between the U.S. Department of State, U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, George Washington University, and the U.S.-India Strategic Partnership Forum, otherwise known as USISPF. This event is scheduled for 1 hour, and we have many incredible and very accomplished speakers, so let's get right to it. We'll start off with opening remarks by the CEO of USISPF, Mr. Mukesh Aghi, and U.S. Consul General in Mumbai, Mr. David Rantz. This will be followed by a panel discussion on promoting women in STEM with some truly stellar speakers, whom I will introduce once we get to the panel. And finally, we will conclude with closing remarks by the Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for India, Ms. Jennifer Larson. Without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker. Mukesh Aghi is the President and CEO of USISPF and a true champion of strengthening US and India business ties. He has held several executive roles in the private sector, including Chief Executive of L&T Infotech, Chairman of Steria Inc. India, and President of IBM India. He is the recipient of numerous prestigious awards, including the JRD Tata Leadership Award and the Government of India's Pravasi Bharatiya Samman Award. Mukesh is a co-chair of the U.S.-India Alliance for Women's Economic Empowerment. Mr. Aghi, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much for the kind introduction. We're delighted that this session is taking place. And I have to compliment David, the Consul General in Mumbai, for taking the lead. He and we talked about it when he was in Washington, D.C. So thank you, David, for making all the effort. I also would like to say thank you to Kat for helping us, and she'll be moderating this session. Kiran Majumdar Shah, an old friend, and participating in the event along with Balaji, Suchitra Ella, and Swati Piramal. I think it's important that we have role models for women, and these are some of the role models who have progressed and taken these STEM programs and employment to a much higher plateau. I think the challenge that we have today is that while India graduates substantially higher number of STEM graduates, the women employment is much lower. I was looking at some of the stats, for example, US, Germany, Canada. While India graduates roughly 43% of the total graduates are women, compared to Canada and US, around 27-34%. The employment participation of these women is only 14%. And what we're seeing when you look at the last 10 years, that number seems to keep on coming down. It's not going up. And with the last 2 years in the COVID crisis we went through, that number has substantially come down further. So we have a challenge. We have an opportunity to see what we can do. So we're delighted to partner with the U.S. Department of State itself. We have a partnership with the George Washington University and USAID to work on this program. So once again, thank you to all the participation. Thank you, David, for your leadership, and look forward to working together, making this a success. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Aghi, for kicking off the event with such inspiration and for really painting the bigger picture. It is now my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, a career diplomat since 1992. David Rantz is the Consul General of the United States of America in Mumbai. Mr. Rantz previously served as a Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for South Asia and as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Pakistan. Prior to that, Mr. Rantz was Director of the Office of Pakistan Affairs. His previous assignments include leadership positions at the U.S. embassies in Cairo and Baghdad. Mr. Rantz has also served in Rabat, Jerusalem, and Karachi. David, you have the mic.
Thank you so much, Yoon. Thanks very much, Mukesh, as well. Good evening to those joining from India, and good morning to those joining us from the United States. As Mukesh mentioned, several months ago, he and I were discussing one of the topics that I raise in pretty much every meeting I have with business and government leaders, and that's how we address the persistent gender gap in India's workforce. And for me, this question has been both mystifying and tremendously important. And I say mystifying because typically a nation's economic development and women's participation in the labor market go hand in hand. So as nations develop, their social, political, and economic ecosystems create more opportunities for women. But as Mukesh highlighted, in India, the story has been different. According to the World Bank, between 1990 and 2020, while India's GDP climbed from $321 billion to $2.7 trillion, with respect to female labor force participation, according to the ILO, it dropped from 30% to 19%. My reasons for calling the issue tremendously important are more obvious. Mountains of evidence point to the positive effects that women's economic empowerment have on them, their families, and their communities. If India is to achieve its national and global goals and aspirations, it will need to unleash the full potential of its female citizens. When Mukesh and I talked, I shared what we have been doing in Mumbai to engage the business community on leading change for gender equality. I was thrilled when he offered to have USISPF partner with the consulate on an effort to encourage more women in STEM careers. While increasing the number of women across the formal economy is vital, the first 2 decades of the 21st century have made very clear that science and technology in particular will significantly shape our future and power the global economy for decades to come. Yet, every country struggles to attract and retain female talent in STEM fields. According to the US Census Bureau, despite making up nearly half of the US workforce, women constitute only 27% of America's STEM workforce in 2019. And as Mukesh noted, in India, the Ministry of Education reports that 23% of STEM graduates in India are women, which is, interestingly, the highest figure in the world. But this is not translated into women actually working in STEM. It is difficult, economy-wide figures are elusive, but multiple studies that look at specific parts of the STEM world give a sense of the larger picture. So for example, in 2019, management consultant firm Zinnov partnered with Intel India to produce a gender diversity benchmark report that found that across 60 companies that employ more than 2 million people in India, women form a mere 26% of the tech workforce. And a UN women's study reports that in Indian scientific research development institutions, women constitute only 14% of the workforce. I'm thrilled that today's discussion will focus on this critical aspect of women's economic empowerment. I'm also delighted that today's event is being sponsored and organized under the auspices of the US-India Alliance for Women's Economic Empowerment. As the figures I mentioned earlier clearly illustrate, the severity and scale of the STEM gender gap require collective action to make meaningful change. The Alliance, a public-private partnership between the State Department, U.S. Agency for International Development, George Washington University, and USISPF, was founded with collective action as its core. I'm particularly pleased and honored to have such an illustrious panel of speakers. We have Kiran Mazumdar-Shah, founder and chairperson of Biocon, Swati Piramal, vice chairperson of Piramal Group, Suchitra Ella, co-founder and joint managing director of Bharat Biotech, and Balaji Ganpati, the global head of corporate social responsibility for the Tata Consultancy Services. Thank you all so much for lending your time, expertise, and perspectives to us this evening. This is really, truly an all-star panel, and I'm honored that you agreed to join us. And I also want to express my huge appreciation to my colleague, Katrina Fotovat, who heads the Secretary of State's Office of Global Women's Issues, who will be moderating the discussion. I greatly look forward to hearing from the panelists how your companies see the successes and challenges in attracting and retaining female talent in STEM roles. Thanks everyone for joining, and I truly hope that tonight's discussion will be only the first step in a collaborative effort to support women in STEM careers for them, for your companies, and for our global community. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for so clearly illustrating why increasing gender balance in India's STEM workforce is so important and so urgent. I would now like to pivot our attention to the panel of speakers and what a panel it is. In the interest of time, I'll be sharing abbreviated bios, but you should know that those of you in the audience can see the full bios in the chat box below. I'll begin by introducing our moderator. Katrina Fodavat is the senior official of the Secretary of State's Office of Global Women's Issues, where she leads a team of gender experts working to integrate gender equality as a focus for US foreign policy worldwide. Ms. Fodavat has over 20 years of experience advocating gender and human rights globally, specifically in conflict and post-conflict settings. She also serves as a co-chair of the Alliance. And now to our power-packed panel and the guest speakers. Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw is the founder and executive chairperson of Biocon Limited, a biotech leader in India and pharmaceutical producer for the world based in Bangalore. Since founding Biocon in her garage in 1978, Ms. Mazumdar-Shaw has led the company to deliver on its promise to make medicines accessible to millions worldwide. Her philanthropy focuses on marginalized communities, and her Mazumdar-Shaw Cancer Center in Bangalore offers affordable world-class care to patients irrespective of socioeconomic class. Ms. Mazumdar-Shaw is also recipient of innumerable honors, including the Government of India's Padma Shri and Padma Bhushan awards. Our next speaker is Dr. Swati Piramal, and she is the vice president of Piramal Group, a global business conglomerate with diverse interests in pharmaceuticals, financial services, and real estate. She is among India's leading scientists and industrialists whose contributions to innovations, new medicine, and public health services have touched countless lives. Dr. Piramal is a champion of women's leadership and was the first woman president of India's Apex Chamber of Commerce, the Associated Chambers of Commerce and Industry of India. For her leadership, she has received many awards, including the Padma Shri Award. And Mrs. Suchitra Ella is the co-founder and joint managing director of Bharat Biotech, a pioneering biotech company based in Hyderabad. I told you this was a power-packed panel. She a leader for gender equality and social responsibility. She is former chairperson of the CII Indian Women Network and spearheads the CSR initiatives of Bharat Biotech. She's received many awards, including the Padma Bhushan just this year in January. And by invitation of the President of the UN General Assembly, recently participated in the discussion Galvanizing Momentum for Universal Vaccination at UN headquarters in New York to share her ideas on innovations and solutions with respect to vaccine equality. And last but certainly not least is Mr. Balaji Ganpati, who is the Chief Social Responsibility Officer and Global Head of Corporate Social Responsibility for Tata Consultancy Services, or TCS. His mission is to harness the power of purpose, people, and technology to advance access, equity, and inclusion across society. Since 2015, TCS has invested over $350 million on its community initiatives and empowered millions of underserved students, minorities, youth, women, and elders to be literate, healthy, educated, and digitally skilled entrepreneurs, employees, and members of society. He is joining us today from New York. Ms. Fodavat, before handing you the mic, I have just one reminder for our viewing audience, which is that we would love to hear from you. As you listen to the conversation, if you have a question or even a pointed comment, please do enter it into the Q&A box on your screen, and we will route these to the moderator, Katrina, for her consideration. So, okay, with that, Ms. Fodavat, over to you.
Thank you so much, Yoon, for that kind introduction. And thank you so much to David and to Mukesh for your amazing remarks and just for being such examples of gender champions. I really appreciate U.S. Consulate Mumbai and the U.S. India Strategic Partnership Forum for co-hosting today's event. Good morning and good evening. It's very bright-eyed, as we say here in the United States, as you can see from the sun coming in on my face. It's wonderful to be here with you all. Kiran, Suchira, Balaji, Swati, thank you so much for participating in today's discussion. I'm so impressed and honored. This is one of the great parts of my job, is to be with amazing people like you all. As senior official within the State Department's Secretary's Office of Global Women's Issues, I have the honor of leading the department's efforts to integrate gender as a cornerstone of U.S. foreign policy, from women and STEM to accelerating our work on the care economy, elevating women's roles in the department's efforts to prevent and end conflict, to supporting the United States' role in the G20. My work reflects President Biden's calls to ensure that gender remains a top domestic and foreign policy priority, and takes me around the world. Last March, the president released an executive order establishing a Gender Policy Council, a White House body that consists of representatives from all executive branch agencies, including the Department of State, and charged this council with reporting directly to him on efforts to advance gender equity and equality. The same executive order mandated the development of a national strategy to advance women's equity and equality, in which every federal department and agency would play an active role. It's a truly whole of government approach. I say this to highlight the prioritization of this administration has placed on gender, the highest of any White House in American history. But without further delay, let's dive into this conversation and these amazing panelists. We are so fortunate to have on our panel two tremendously successful women who pursued STEM academically, then later built stellar careers in STEM-focused businesses. For Kiran and Swati, how did you decide to pursue a STEM career? And what challenges did you face? And do you think young women face them today? Why don't we start with Kiran?
Thanks, Kat, and it's just great to be on this panel. And thank you, David, and thank you, Mukesh, for really setting this up, because I think it's such an important discussion that we all ought to have on women in STEM. Now, for me, of course, I did sort of graduate as a scientist. I was very keen to apply my knowledge to a business. And of course, my business purpose was about, using science for, making impact in many, many ways. And I started my business with also another set of objectives. I also felt that there were a number of women graduating in science, but not pursuing careers in science. And therefore, when I decided to set up my company, I said, one of my sort of driving objectives was to create a company that was going to be an attractive workplace for women scientists. So I really wanted to attract women to science as careers. And of course, the other objective was also to create a very important opportunity for scientists in general, because I found that many, many scientists were pursuing opportunities outside the country. And I wanted to reverse the brain drain, saying, why don't I create a science-led company which would attract not just scientists back from other parts of the world, but also provide opportunities for women to pursue scientific careers. So that was the kind of dual-pronged approach I had to starting my company. And as you know, I did pioneer, the whole biotech sector in India, which was just unknown and untapped. And therefore, I wanted to really create this opportunity for life sciences to really start focusing on the power of biotechnology. And my first business that I really started with was developing a number of novel enzyme technologies. And my whole purpose was to replace chemical polluting technologies with green enzyme technologies. I guess it was an idea ahead of its time in the late 70s and early 80s. But nevertheless, I was very excited with that thought of using biotech for greening the world, so to speak. As an entrepreneur, I've always sort of reinvented my business. So about 20 years into my entrepreneurial journey, I started leveraging all the technologies that I developed for enzymes and pivoted to biopharmaceuticals, because I felt that biopharmaceuticals were life-saving and essential medicines, which were beyond the access and affordability of most patients in the developing world. And I think all the women on this panel are really addressing that affordable access to life-saving medicines and vaccines, which really drove me into this kind of pursuit. And there, I just want to share with the audience that what has made me very excited is the fact that at least in our company, I find that our R&D, efforts are being steered by a gender ratio of 40% women. So I think that's very encouraging. Okay, and I think we are beginning to see leadership as well in that R&D milieu, where we are seeing many more women leaders, program managing, driving certain programs, and playing very strong leadership roles in taking those programs to the market. So that's one very reassuring sign, and I guess that's one part of my objective that I've achieved. So that business purpose that I had of not only making impact on global healthcare, but also providing this opportunity for women scientists, at least a part of that has been fulfilled. But in many other parts of my organization, I have a long way to go, because I do find that women tend to be very, very diffident of pursuing careers, at least in India, when it comes to sales and marketing, when it comes to manufacturing, shop floor jobs, and things like that. So, since ours is very advanced in terms of, the kind of manufacturing we do, I would like more women to participate in that opportunity. So I'm now trying very hard to get women to look at job opportunities across the board. And I, for one, feel very optimistic and very encouraged by the fact that there is such a spotlight on gender equity and gender-based opportunities, because I think the world wants women to succeed. And I often say that it's only a gender-balanced, economy that will actually drive sustainable growth. And I think that's what the world needs to look at. And I'm really focused on the fact that ESG and this whole initiative that we are seeing at different levels. The UN has a huge focus on gender equity. Governments have a huge focus on gender equity. The government of India itself has initiated so many different women empowerment programs that I keep telling women, this is your era, this is your time. Don't lose that opportunity, because all the stars are aligned. Everyone wants to help you. Everyone wants you to succeed. So there's no excuse. I'll end there.
That's fantastic. I love that you used your own experiences to create opportunities for women. And Swati, let's turn to you. How did you decide to pursue a STEM career, and what challenges did you face, and do you think young women are facing them today?
Thank you, Kat. I became a doctor because when I was 10 years old, I saw a doctor save the life of a family member, a young boy who had a vaccine crisis. And, I wanted to be a doctor after that. And I loved biology in school. So I think the importance of a teacher teaching STEM is very crucial. And then we started a pharmaceutical company and built it brick by brick to become a global company. I wanted to do a research center. There weren't any women in science at that time. There weren't any patent attorneys who knew how to file a discovery patent. And I remember that I took somebody on maternity leave from Germany, and I asked her to train some of my female patent attorneys. And would you believe now, 20 years later, they lead that development, have won patent fights from around the world. So they're really good at it now. And then I turned my vision to starting to do STEM for children. And today we have 2 million children who we are impacting in schools. Mostly they are in the 110 aspirational districts, where all the indicators are very low, and also in the 100 million people who live in tribal areas. And so the way we are thinking about having this dream of million girls in STEM fulfilled is to redesign education to the 21st century learning. And that is using what the Prime Minister calls digital education, but not only digital, but we want to make it phygital, new term we have coined, where we think that we should have in classroom as well as digital and have an immersive experience. And then to redesign the way maths and biology and STEM is taught so that they can really influence the world in being these young leaders. So we've set these strong foundations, we've improved the pedagogy and the curriculum. We've built, we've got these, what we call Karuna Fellows. This is women-led development. It's not women development, it's women-led development, that they take the leadership to train younger girls and to train them in STEM and many other things, digital learning. And these fellowships, we have now 2,000 of them across rural areas where they lead that effort. And of course, the Saksham Bitya Abhiyan, I think, is this national campaign that even Kiran mentioned. The government is doing so much to have girls in school and learning. And in fact, in Mission Bunyad is in Rajasthan, where they are saying that, this is a state in which many girls get married early and they have no chance to go to school. And we are trying to do this kind of mission in those kind of states where they adopt digital learning, explore the significance, and have these futuristic skills of STEM. So right from a young girl to developing my company, which is today a global company, to getting my daughter to also help run the company, and also to focus my education now that the children help run the company, to looking at young girls and having this dream of 1 million girls in STEM and learning.
I must say, what incredible inspirations you both are. And I love that digital. I love to use that as well. And who knows, if I had inspirations like you and mentors like you both, I think I would have gone into STEM field as well. So thank you both so much. I also want to note a key challenge we see the world over is the number of women professionals who leave the workforce following the birth of their first child or in the response to other family care related responsibilities. For Suchitra and Balaji, what can companies do to attract more women to STEM careers? And just as importantly, what can they do to retain them? Why don't we start with Suchitra? Suchitra, are you there?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me? All right.
Yes.
Hi, everyone. Yes, of course. I remember the early days of us coming back from the United States in 1996, 98 was our transition. And I couldn't agree with Kiran more about those startup days. And of course, Swati, talking about how we didn't have the necessary human capital, especially coming to women or men at that point of time. I'm sure Kiran and Swati have experienced this ahead of my time more, and I came back later. But nevertheless, it was pretty much, I think, I was also in the same boat, though I personally don't come from a STEM background in higher education. I think what companies could do, or what we have done in particular, is to offer them a space to be creative and to look at research and drug discovery as a give them the freedom to operate. Though we run a commercial organization, we have a very robust R&D department, and the portfolio of products, the innovation, and enabling innovation in the organization from day one gives us a kind of a large platform to encourage women, to offer them the option of maybe moving back and forth from processes and manufacturing to even sometimes to R&D and drug discovery, or even a drug development, because that's another huge part where clinical research and clinical trials and data management and all those areas come into play. So I think it's important to impart the kind of training and opening the research pathways for these young girls to stay back in STEM, encouraging them also to take up, to look at problems or problem solving research projects that need to cater to the challenges that we particularly have in countries like India, with the kind of demographics that we come from, and our own region specific diseases and the infectious diseases or the other areas of diseases that exist, not only for India but also for the entire developing world. I think that's very important, that India needs to be in that pivotal role as and lead from the front in terms of being able to cater to not only to our own needs in the country, but also be able to offer affordable technology. So I think that's important to show them that kind of pathways that exist. And also, I think to address or to look at funding and networking platforms for many of these young women, because some of them feel that they probably, especially in when they have to take up their own small research projects or or group research projects, I think funding becomes also an issue. So maybe if, for example, we have we run a small foundation. It's quite small at this point of time, but we do encourage our STEM, male or female for that matter, to go into, to take up research projects, to align with academic institutes, and they can also progress their, take their own academic training and learning ahead of the game. If they were, for example, if they had a bachelor's degree in one of the sciences, in life sciences, by allowing them to explore research opportunities by collaborating with universities, thereby they also opt for a PhD program. So there is a joint PhD project or research that is taken up by the graduate or the postgraduate, and she then completes a PhD by taking up a research project that is of interest to her or to the issues that are around her, or and also if something that would be useful to industry, and an application, an applied technology or a process development kind of a project, which we definitely need in most of us in our manufacturing processes. And also at the end of the day, she goes back, completes that, and gets a PhD out of that entire time that she has spent. So this is also we have found this to be a good retaining kind of option to put in front of them. So those of them who are interested to continue could take such avenues that is open to them. But I must say that in India, we initially, the young graduates are very eager when they join their first or the second jobs. They continue, but then post 30, in their early 30s and mid 30s is when the family structure changes. They get married, and sometimes most of our Indian girls get they move away to another country, or where the spouse, they have to join their spouses. Most of the time it's out in the West. So we have, of course, lost quite a bit of our own female workforce in STEM to certain social issues like this. but nevertheless, giving them a freedom to operate, and also professional freedom to operate, and also to be supportive in terms of, when it comes to, many of them are now nuclear families, they're away from their families. So I think helping, being there for them around when they go through maternity and other health related problems. I think that is a huge area of support that companies can give, so that we can retain them and then bring them back, even if they have to take a slightly longer break for their health condition. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your comments about creating pathways and new opportunities for education and being flexible. Balaji, the same question for you. What can companies do to attract more women to STEM careers? And again, just as importantly, what can they do to retain them?
Thank you, Kat. And first of all, such an inspiring opportunity to be among such illustrious women. So I thank you all for paving the path for everybody who has followed behind you, and for being role models and inspirations for millions around the world. As a father of a young STEMinist, as a husband and brother of women who are very strong STEM leaders, and leading efforts for a company that has the largest amount of women in the STEM workforce in India, it's humbling to be amongst all of you and hear your insights and your recommendations. To me, I think you have to look at this in two perspectives. One is from the perspective of pathways, which many of the other panelists alluded to. I'll talk about that, which is all about increasing access, equity, and inclusion for women in STEM at all levels in their life. And the second is specifically about creating pipelines where companies have to make concerted efforts to not only identify opportunities that are more narrow and message well around what that means for everybody, but especially for women, and then build a clear path, to move from entry level to mid-level to senior level to executive level, and board, and even founding new companies like many of my colleagues in this panel have done. So let me tackle the second thing first. So the pipeline issue is known, and from a STEM perspective, I think the lessons that we have seen, we have about 37% representation of women in the workforce. We have over 200,000 women STEM professionals working at TCS. So over the years, what we have seen is that the opportunity to attract and provide great career paths for young women right out of college is very high, right? So Mukesh and David spoke about the percentage of women who go into STEM graduation degrees, whether it is engineering or adjacent disciplines, that being high. So providing opportunities for them in the first 10 years of their career, I think many companies are doing this really well, right? So in terms of retaining people at the early stages. And Suchitra also spoke about this in terms of where the fall off happens, right? Maternity and marriage are unfortunately two great life events, which often tend to be career breakers for a lot of women. So what can be done to and a lot has been done, I believe, by the corporate sector in India to react to this, right? The policies have changed. The support systems that are there within the organization have changed. Even from a government level, the overall social nets that exist, social safety nets that exist have changed and improved. And all of that has contributed to more retention from that first step towards marriage or towards having a family, right? But within organizations, like things like, creating smaller communities of women who are in similar spaces, giving access to role models and mentors within the company who have gone through the same path, and then intentionally looking at policies around performance, promotion, which are not only promote equality, but promote equity. So understanding the life circumstances that people go through, and factoring that into your policy, and then how you develop culture on top of those policies is a very critical factor. And we are also a work in progress. Yes, our numbers are better compared to the overall situation in STEM in India, 36% women in the workforce. But when it comes to the mid-career level, it's equitable to where India is. And at the leadership level, we are working to improve it about 18 to 20% and growing with every passing year. So sponsorship becomes equally important as you rise from those initial 10 years to the next 10 to 20 years. And their decision-making of who gets to be in a P&L role, who gets to be in a leadership role matters a lot. Because, again, transparency and more sponsorship helps create opportunities for women to take up positions where they are then able to build large teams and demonstrate that they can be successful in any kind of environment. And with TCS, that's what we have seen a lot of success in. So many women leaders at that second, third, and fourth layer of leadership in the organization have grown as a result of that sponsorship. And today, they act as the catalyst along with allies from among men to increase the numbers and representation at the leadership level. So that's what I wanted to talk about on the pipeline part. On the pathways part, which I believe is a larger problem set that we need to deal with. See, one positive trend that's going in our favor is that the participation of girls in early childhood education and primary education in India is at its highest in the past 20 to 30 years, right? I would say COVID notwithstanding. So taking that 2-year impact out, it has increased the most in the last 20 to 30 years. But creating pathways means that you need to demystify what STEM means. First of all, STEM, the general understanding is that it is very focused and it is very niche in specific areas. But in my experience, and I'm sure all the panelists agree, it is about solving problems that we see around the world, right? Using technology, using science, using engineering and creative thinking to solve the world's problems. So demystifying what STEM means and starting very early on in helping young girls understand the value of how social issues can be solved using STEM is a key learning that we have had. So on the pathway side, our interventions, our program starts from early childhood. In fact, it starts from adult literacy, because in many cases, it is the mother of the family, elders of the family, who are actually passing on the values and what is good to do in your life. So our adult literacy program, we've been running it for the past 20 years, and 80% of participants are women. It takes 55 hours to make them functionally literate, and it is transformative for the whole family. So especially in rural India, where a majority of over 1 billion people are in rural India, and therefore, if we have to solve this pathway problem, we'll have to work in rural India. Education and literacy among the family members is the first step. And we have seen significant results in places like New district in Haryana, where there are social barriers on top of gender barriers, women starting self-help groups, and then encouraging and ensuring that all of their girls who are in the family are participating in school consistently. Now, then comes the K-12 education space, where the skills that you teach, I think, has to be of two kinds. And that's where we adopt a content, context, and connection as the three levers to help create this pathway. Content that is relevant to the educational needs that is there. And this is where companies can work a lot with the government and the social sector to make a huge difference. And you heard a couple of examples from my esteemed colleagues on the panel. So we have two programs that address this. One is GoIT, which is now in 40 countries around the world. And in India, it is there for every school and for every state to use. And currently, we are promoting it as an opportunity for young people to learn design thinking, learn the problem-solving skills of the 21st century, learn entrepreneurial skills, and come up with solutions to problems that they see around them. So they are shaping themselves as not only consumers of technology, but creators and innovators of technology at such a young age. And the kind of ideas that they come up with is incredible. By focusing on aspirational districts and focusing on where the multidimensional poverty index is very high, we as companies that have a great history and great resources have to take on the problems that are the highest. So that's what we are doing with YT. With Ignite My Future, which is a teacher-facing program, we are adopting a transdisciplinary approach to STEM. So not teaching STEM as science or math or any one discipline, but transdisciplinary across all disciplines, whether it's arts or humanities or English. How do you introduce concepts of computational thinking, which can become a foundational skill for every young person? And educators are not part of the problem, they are part of the solution, especially rural educators who are under-resourced. How do you develop capacity among them? How do you give them resources? How do you role model how things can be taught? Because if they have not been in an industry setting, how can they be expected to teach what goes on in an industry setting, right? So providing the context, so content and then the context is so important for attracting and retaining women in STEM. And then finally, the connection. We have 500,000 people working in TCS. How can they be valuable, purposeful connectors to young girls who are aspiring to, be leaders of the future? And that's what we do by intentionally including employees in our programs, in all of the CSR programs that I mentioned. And this takes care of K-12. And then our youth employment program addresses girls and women in marginalized colleges in both engineering and non-engineering disciplines, where it is a travesty that the majority, what the statistics, if you go below the statistics, what it doesn't tell you at the highest level is that the participation of rural girls and boys from college in STEM careers is at its worst. And the reason for that is the adjacency to opportunities that companies provide is limited. So the pathway and the pipeline sort of start meeting there, and then conscious efforts needs to be taken. Whether you call it affirmative hiring, whether you call it call it by any name, but conscious efforts need to be taken to look at the composition of whom you're hiring. Are all your graduates coming from elite institutes? That's great. And there may be marginalized representation there, but can you go beyond and work with rural colleges, both engineering and non-engineering? And today our program, Youth Employment Program, is in all states in India and all union territories. We're working with the states like Manipur and Kashmir and Andaman and Nicobar Islands as union territory. And there it is focused on marginalized students, especially girls, and giving them that connection to industry, the final set of skills that will help them transition from college to career. So that's how I wanted to frame it, pathway as well as pipeline, and then content, context, and connection as intentional ways to help attract and retain women in STEM.
Thank you so much, Balaji. That was incredible. I love the analogy of the leaky pipeline and the pathway, and I'm going to steal your term, STEMinist, and maybe make t-shirts for everyone on that. That's fantastic. We are running short on time, so I would like to turn to one of the audience questions. So this is one of the questions from the audience, which actually touches on something that David had actually mentioned in his remark, that gender imbalance in STEM, which is really not isolated to India. This is for all the panelists. How are the reasons for the gender imbalance seen in STEM fields different from that seen in other parts of the economy? And we can start with Kiran.
Yeah, I think, when you look at other parts of the economy, it's about, if you segregate the informal and the formal sector, and if you basically focus on the formal sector, I do believe that STEM is far more inclusive than many other sectors. So I think we have to look at it in that context. And I think from my point of view, yes, I think we are disappointed in seeing those leaky pipelines, and that's what we need to fix. And I think what I would like to really focus on is almost like it's the whole industry is actually looking at gender balance in a very affirmative way. So there is affirmative action. I think the post-pandemic world gives us many opportunities to correct this imbalance, because I think women have faced this home life imbalance, which is being corrected by these hybrid models, which I think again is quite an interesting opportunity. At least we are looking at those models to actually fix some of these issues that even Suchitra and others mentioned about these two events in one's lives of marriage and maternity actually disrupting their work commitments. And I think these hybrid models can fix some of that. Another aspect of it is, of course, about making sure that you mentor and get management to really empower and mentor women to seek leadership roles in a way that wasn't done before. There's also things about women needing to push themselves, okay? Because I also believe that women also need to push themselves ahead and not be that diffident, because very often, when I have a team meeting and I find women are not that participative in those team meetings, they are sort of more silent in the interactions. And yet after the meeting, women come up to me and say, oh, by the way, I wanted to say this. What do you think of this? And I said, that's a great idea. Why didn't you speak about it at the meeting? So I think we need to coach women a lot more about being more confident and more participative.
Thank you so much. And Swati?
One of the things we've got to remember when we are running a company is that women flower 10 years later because of maternity and children. And then if we can reward them with, with that context, and also treat them with respect. I think in many, many companies, if you just do that simple thing, cleaning up the, PCs with stuff which shouldn't be there, and then just giving them respect in the room, as Kiran said, in a conference, and give their ideas, that pattern they want to write could be a world beater, and then give them that respect, and that changes, I think, women in that economy. It really gives them those two things, really give them that encouragement that they can actually take on the world. And I feel very strongly that women can do very well in STEM careers because they have that meticulous way, that taxonomy, that way of improving it. And increasingly companies have so many more women coming into the STEM field all over the world. So I'm very optimistic, I would say, as Kiran said, this is the best time to be a woman, to really look at what the governments are doing, what President Biden is doing, what Prime Minister Modi is doing. And I feel that digital learning will be transformative. In digital with some physical presence, as I call it, phygital, will transform the nation. It's mind-boggling what that can do. And the Prime Minister recently called a conclave about how do we do this and how do we get there? And when I was at Harvard, I remember that digital learning fell off, the cliff when only 16% finished the class. And so I think it has to be unique to India, this solution to get more women into the economy, and perhaps unique to each country's culture, to have it in local languages is very important. And then getting them to be in this immersive experience of science and technology. Those are the things which will drive us forward.
Thank you so much. And Suchitra, I want to give you a last few moments. Suchitra? Okay, Balaji?
Sorry about that.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Okay. Kiran and Swati have put it out so well. I just would like to add that we need to catch them young because especially in life sciences, both of them who are my predecessors and seniors in the sector would agree that we, especially in the life sciences, we lose most of these young, brilliant girls to the engineering and to computer sciences and to the IT, but not that it's not a part of STEM, but for us specifically in the life sciences sector, I think it's important that these young girls need to be oriented towards what research and in medical and biological areas of life sciences leads and brings about the kind of changes that we look for for the entire globe as such. The pandemic, I think, has taught us many lessons. So I think children from high school and of course in their college years, again, exposing them to faculty who are also, again, I think the percentage of faculty in our institutions also probably have, the percentage of the male versus the female faculties in many of our institutions. Some could have them equal, but there could be many which probably don't have enough. So these girls, the females in STEM, sometimes feel inhibited in many ways. Like Kiran pointed out this, exactly what happens when we are in a meeting. These girls don't talk about it, and then they catch you somewhere else in the corridor and then start talking about it. And I would say the same thing what Kiran has just mentioned earlier. So I push them to be more to put their step forward and speak about it. I mean, I think those inhibitions and those the ability to talk and to be more, to expose them to diversity, because many of them, especially in India, their first time in a job or first time they have taken, they may be the first graduate in their home, and they may be, in a first job. So they don't even know sometimes some of these social skills and the, professional office skills set that's required. So I think in a larger context, we need to bring all these comfort zones for them to be able to overcome their inhibitions or their, their proclaimed limitations, I would call them, and just push themselves up a little bit. And if we as organizations can also just give that little hand holding, and I'm sure we can shape them out well for the pipeline, for the pathways and for the pipeline over their long haul careers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And my apologies, that is all we have time for now. But we really look forward to engaging with you all as the Alliance continues to roll out its activities. Thank you for all such an engaging discussion and for the outstanding work that you are doing in support of women's economic participation and STEM. Turning now back to our organizers for the next phase of today's program. Thank you for having me.
Thank
All
you.
right, wow. What a terrific discussion, and how I wish we had more time to continue. Thanks so much to our amazing guest speakers, and huge thanks to Katrina for moderating that fantastic discussion and juggling such an amazing group of speakers with such little time. It's now my pleasure to introduce our final speaker today. Jennifer Larson has been Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary for India since September 2021. She is a career diplomat whose most recent overseas tour was as the Deputy Principal Officer here in Mumbai. In 2016 to 2020. In addition to assignments in Washington, D.C., she has served in Libya, Pakistan, France, Sudan, Jerusalem, and Lebanon. Jennifer, it's so nice to see you again after 2 years. I hope you enjoyed the panel as much as I did. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Yoon. It's really wonderful to see familiar faces on the screen, familiar names from the consulate and from old friends there in Mumbai. Thank you all for participating in today's event. So good morning from Washington, good evening there in Mumbai, a place that is still so close to my heart. I, as Yoon mentioned, I was most recently as working with David as the deputy there in Mumbai for 4 years. I'm now here in Washington until I return to India later on this this summer to be the Consul General in Hyderabad. So I will certainly be working with some of you in that capacity. Also very proud to be a member of the Alliance's Executive Committee here in Washington. And thanks to Radhika and others for putting this program together. Just to conclude, I would like just to the importance of the U.S. and India relationship is just been magnified over the past couple of years in this administration. We've had Prime Minister Modi here, of course, in September. We've had Quad summits and a Quad ministerial just last month in Australia. We'll be welcoming, I think, some more conversations here in a 2+2 dialogue with our ministers of defense and external affairs here in April, we hope. And I know that Special Envoy Kerry was just in India just last week and the week before. Our cooperation in all of these mechanisms just reinforces India's role as our vital partner in confronting our biggest global challenges, to include the prosperity of our people, our middle classes, and to work together in support of gender equality and women's economic advancement. David mentioned earlier that pre-pandemic, IMF had thought that increasing women's economic participation in India could add close to 30% to the GDP. And I was in Mumbai when the pandemic began, and witnessed how it set all of us back in India as well as in the United States, with women and girls disproportionately impacted, with businesses closing and women dropping out of the workforce, and certainly the challenges preventing all children from having access to education. We saw that in India, we see that in the United States. So digital technology has become an increasingly important tool for education, for financial inclusion, entrepreneurship, civic participation, and a lifeline for critical health services and information. Yet women are still being left behind. I think nevertheless, we can feel optimistic that on recent data, women in India are participating in STEM courses and acquiring critical skills at some of the fastest rates in the world, abetted by a pandemic-induced drive towards upskilling online. And a number of the panelists have mentioned, how important that is, this newness of the hybrid possibilities for keeping women perhaps more engaged through different life cycles in the workforce. We know that connecting women to STEM education and careers is a critical way to boost job creation and entrepreneurship in the most lucrative areas of our economies. And as panelists mentioned today, and I'm going to also use the phrase the leaky pipeline, we have to keep women in this pipeline in order to succeed in STEM careers. The tipping points, as mentioned before, breaking into the workplace and staying there after starting families. And the efforts have to start early. Adolescence is when you grab imaginations for all children, girls, boys, all. Connecting girls with mentors early on, I think, is one way to help shape this new generation of STEM talents. And then breaking bias, as we've been called to do this year by International Women's Day. Happy International Women's Day again, a day later, requires, among other things, for champions to come together to address the bottlenecks that are holding women back. So led by the US-India Strategic Partnership Forum in Mukesh and the Alliance, in coordination with the US Embassy in Delhi, we'll be launching a US-India Women in STEM working group this May to convene leading companies, universities, and investors in the United States and India to identify opportunities to foster women in STEM in India. Through workshops held throughout the year, this working group will aim to foster venture-backed investments focused on female tech founders, promote workplace policies that support women's retention and leadership in the STEM workforce, and to accelerate US-India female scholarship and research. Through the India Million Women Mentors Initiative, the Alliance is going to work closely with corporate leaders across India and the United States to foster 1 million mentoring relationships in India. And to date, the initiative has galvanized 100,000 mentoring pledges. The State Department is going to host a meeting with corporate leaders and STEM-oriented civil society organizations interested in learning about this later on this month. So please do be in contact with Radhika, who is here on the line, to learn more about these efforts. So I thank you all for your time and your efforts and your interest in championing women in STEM in India, and I look forward to continuing to work with all of you in the years to come. So thank you, Yoon, thanks to the consulate, thank you to David, and to friends and colleagues in India and here in the United States.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thanks again to all of our speakers and our viewing audience. As Jennifer just said, today's event is part of a much larger effort by the US-India Alliance for Women's Economic Empowerment to do exactly as its name suggests, which is to forge ties between our two countries to advance women in the economy. If you're interested in joining the Alliance in the mission, as Jennifer just mentioned, please reach out to the Executive Director of the Alliance, Radhika Prabhu. We will put her email address on the screen in just a moment. Thanks again for joining us today. To those here in India, have a wonderful evening, and to those in the US, have a great day. Goodbye.